management of the ongoing development of the tools, set of tools, Webpack, Heritrix, whatever new tools. We're looking at formal release cycles, roadmaps, and review process, etc., etc. So the goal is that we have IPC managed releases of Heritrix 3 Webpack by 2014 GA. So have it from between now and then, we have the time to put in place the structure needed to support this. The next recommendation really is based on an observation that despite Heritrix 3 being available and released, that a very small number of institutions are making use of it. So a recommendation is to enable members using Heritrix earlier versions to adopt H3, either use it directly or embed it underneath the curator tools, Net Archive Suite, and WCT. I think actually there's a reason why H3 is not adopted. That's because of that upgrade within those tools is problematic. So the goal proposed is that we're going to be looking at 100% Heritrix 1 to 3 migration within the current agreement running towards
just 3 years.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We're going back in time.
We can go back in time if that's what it takes.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, we're not saying everyone has to use Heritrix, but everyone that's using Heritrix to migrate within this time period.
Yeah. The next one is on Webpack, Memento. So we feel that there's a need to educate the membership about the current Webpack API, which not everybody perhaps know that exists or makes use of it. And also we would like to expand or encourage the use of it within the current membership so that we can follow on with iterative development based on the requirements and all that. And also we would like to recommend that we consider using Memento as a mechanism to connect members' archives which are geographically dispersed. And however, we feel that despite the combination of Webpack and Memento giving great exposure to the holdings of the web archives, members' archives, this is not something that just the Access Working Group can take on and run. This needs attention from the steering committee and broad support from the membership, perhaps funding as well. The current structure of working groups, yes, I always forget. So we're thinking that the goal proposed is 100% Webpack users contribute to metadata URL list to Memento service hosted by IPC. So here we're proposing a Memento service hosted by the IPC. I think that would have implications as well. This is just a proposed goal. And the next recommendation is to rethink and reorganize the current working groups, because we felt that the current structure and running projects is really sort of dependent on member institutions' goodwill and contribution, and that don't always, it doesn't always work. We're proposing to reformulate or reorganize them into interest groups, and that there shouldn't perhaps be an expectation on work packages, work items based on voluntary basis. What we're thinking is that to tie this in with the IPC funded projects, that the current working groups can be transitioned into interest groups and act as as users to give feedback to specific IPC funded projects and make use of the current meeting structure to review work in progress, to give feedback. And so you run formally funded project, but the interest group, the potentially future users of the deliverables of these projects actually get involved in that process to review work in progress and provide feedback. And the steering committee actually oversees through the program manager oversees this development, and the project answered to the steering committee. So we think that is a better way of working. So the goal we set is that we implement this new structure by the next GA and tie it in with the IPC funded projects. The next recommendation is the periodic survey of members' activities, making use of the ISO technical report on quality indicators and statistics, which will allow us to benchmark quality, access, and a bunch of other things. And we also need to start collating evidence of scholarly use of web archives. Our goal is that we should start putting in place a template for the survey, and we should have done the survey by the next GA, of at least 15 IPC members making use of the set of ISO indicators and statistics. And those who were with us in the room have all signed up for it. Last recommendation really is based on the observation that it's not always easy for people to find information, especially those who just started in web archive and newcomers. We're thinking that we need to pull together or put in place a central repository of information and documentation about tools, practical guidelines, survey results, what have you. These could all go on the IPC website by way of speaking. The goal for this is just we start doing it right now. And that's it from us. Any questions?
These priorities in the orders, I felt they were raised in the room, not as they came in the conversation. So, first priority is save the common tools, Heritrix and WebAC. Maybe you went a bit further about discussing on how to organize and sustain that. So, there was a discussion that we have tried that several times in different fashions. It still doesn't work, so if we're trying it again, we have to try it a different way. And there was a fair discussion between centralization and distribution of development resources. We had people raise their hands to answer the question, what would it take to have 20 days of development resource for your institutions of someone who is qualified in Heritrix? And it turned out magically that we had many people ready to contribute. This was a geek group, and I forgot to mention that. So, in a nutshell, people agree that if it's only happy geeks working together without someone in charge, people even mention a wrangler or a dictator, it won't work. But we do need a balance. So the proposal is that someone is paid part-time, at least to help kicking off the structure of this and maintain a network of solid contributors, and that should be roles and layers and levels of contribution. You start with small bug fixing and then you graduate to another level of contribution. So I won't get into the details, but there was a very interesting discussion. I took notes on how this could work, but IBC should support financially a position to help with monitoring the project, and that would help also advocate towards institutions management so that they get a risk analysis of what it would cost not to do anything about Heritrix, and some benchmark information about what it would cost to go to a vendor or try to rebuild something. So good, interesting elements about how to move forward with things we haven't tried before. So that sort of balance between distribution of code development and a central director or like a conductor in a music band to coordinate things. And that applies to Heritrix, and that applies to the WebAC mission equally, with maybe a feeling that Heritrix is more complicated, but is sort of robust in the way it stagnates. And on the other hand, the feeling that WebAC is maybe easier to work on, but right now it needs emergency fixes. So maybe we have to consider that. If we can't attack both at the same time or find the proper organization, we might need to prioritize. That's for tools. That's the top one priority, just like in group one. We have a second work package, which I would recap as outreach to content providers. Again, we've crossed that discussion before in the past, but the idea comes back with a different proposal. What's the goal? The goal is to collect more provenance metadata when harvesting, ask producers to make their websites easier to harvest, and for that, disseminate and advocate to reach out more to content providers. 3 types of content providers. Most exciting one is individuals, the crowd. So that was one suggestion by Chris Carpenter earlier on during the meeting that we run our bell. How can we engage in some crowdsourcing actions to reach out to individual website makers? B, other administrations and agencies. And national libraries, university libraries may have a role, or it's easier for them to do some sort of advocacy. And C, bigger players. And for that, the most interesting suggestion was that when we have to deal with a global player such as YouTube, is if a national organization has a legal framework to start the discussion at the national level, it should tell the others and they could try to join efforts. Let's share information about that. We're discussing YouTube. Okay, time is flying, so I'm rushing to the next things. So we did discuss the organization of IPC as well, and came out with very similar proposals. There is the usual tensions. We want to be together, but we want to be separate. We're programmers at the geeks. Programmers, we like librarians, but we can't stop focused when we're together in meetings. But then others would say you can't build proper web harvesting collections if you don't have this mix. It's a very distinctive asset of IPCs to bring those people together. So what's the solution? So there is a consensus about the fact that the preservation working group is doing well and should not be disbanded in any way since it's doing well. There is a consensus that working groups don't really work or don't get enough work done to pretend they're working groups without having everybody feeling comfortable about it. So we came to the same wording. We suggest that instead there should be interest groups who interact with task forces or project structure that are in charge with dedicated resources to do the work. So typically a working group or an interest group would be the right place to discuss the specification and priorities of a project or deliverable, but and some of the people in this group would be involved in the project management, but there would be a distribution of role in those structures. There were even more provocative suggestions that the very idea of groups, like periodical groups meeting, should be disbanded, and instead we should have topics, only topics, like in a conference, and conference be organized by topics. That sounded quite attractive, but I have to share my afterthought is that we need to keep some entry points in the community for people to start with a place, with a community. Maybe this group does not reflect or extend exactly what's there, but we need smaller segments, especially as we're growing, for people to come in. So maybe also if we want to keep work to be done between meetings, we need some sort of smaller platforms for people to get together. So there's a tension here. We've got good feedback to prepare next meetings, and we've got excellent feedback about the way yesterday this very session is organized. The idea that there is a plenary moment with presentations and a panel, then splitting in groups where people will discuss things in parallel, that's something that works. That's something people like. 10, 20, okay. We talked about the website because so this morning I did something. Yesterday it was mostly about tools. So Heritrix, WebEC, and outreach to content providers, the big ideas, and organization. So this morning I asked people, okay, you have 1 minute each, what do you hate about IPC, or would like to get improved or get rid of, what do you really like? In a nutshell, and people had only 2 words per person for each of those likes, not like. So that's good. What came out is that people kept saying information sharing, community. And what I love is being here with the family. What I hate is when we're not together. Or what I hate is that when we're not together, we're really not together. We don't work remotely. We don't do enough things between meetings. So what does that mean? That means that people really, the communications part of IPC, the forum sharing, so the fact that we have a website, the fact that we make good meetings, this was finally acknowledged. Otherwise, we could have believed that all people want these tools, and the rest they actually take for granted. So I had to tell them that it's not granted, it's a lot of work. So doing that, and on the top of that, following that list, might be difficult. So what I heard is that they're not ready to give up with the quality of this forum or the quality of those meetings. So it is also a requirement that we maintain that level of sharing, because top one is networking and information sharing. That's good, I think, to say. Also not to give Harry Potter the feeling that everything she's done is not acknowledged. Maybe suggestions about the website, and I won't get into the details, but this idea that it shouldn't be the information shouldn't be too fragmented. Okay, there's the desire for something more central, easy to find, that's standing there. Tools, information, registrations that would help people doing their own benchmark, and at the same time that the website should be more collaborative. So what I told people is that it's designed to be collaborative, but it can't collaborate without people. So I think it's an interesting question for the next step of the website is how do we engage people to provide regular updates on behalf of smaller communities and content to the website. Okay, it won't happen alone. And so people don't really feel they need an internal website. That's another interesting idea. They would love blogs on topics that they could share with the outside public. That would also bring awareness, discussion, engage with other people. So maybe the internal part of this discussion could be quite limited to a certain number of business matters, but most of the expert discussion could actually be shared publicly, which would actually help bringing more resources to IPC. I'm almost done. The last idea or discussion we had was how do we interact with the rest of the world. So this was really a discussion about countries that are not in IPC and for which we know there is no web archiving. 3 ideas. A, we're not ready to grow again. The next 3 years we need to focus on improving ourselves as we are. B, of course we should keep the door open to anybody who wants to come in, but we won't be as proactive as we've been when we shifted from 12 to 14. C, ways to still be involved is be there when some things are happening in other parts of the world that requires web harvesting. And that we have done, like we have done for the Arabic Spring. But maybe that would require a bit more of organization, a bit more of planning, a bit more of resources. That asks the question of how to support Internet Archive as a key player in that to continue those sort of event harvesting in parts of the world that require it, or thematic collections around that. I think that's an interesting issue. That could be part of another interest group that does not exist, that could be about collection management, which would look into global, like world collection policy issues, such as that one. End of story. Thank you.
As we started the discussions was trying to have each of our members talk about what would we need to take back to our institutions to justify renewal of membership in a year or 18 months hence. And the consistent themes that came back from all the participants were things like the value of being able to meet face-to-face and network with like-minded professionals that had unique expertise to share and change. Those were really valuable aspects of membership in IPC. Things like being able to identify specific projects that were executed under the umbrella of IPC that had direct impact on your institution. Those are things that we wanted to be able to connect the dots in 12 to 18 months and basically say these specific projects
had an impact on benefiting my organization in these ways. So those were some of the things that were coming up as priorities, and some participants articulated those even as cost measures, where you could actually articulate back to management things like, here's how much resource was saved and or time saved in being able to come up to speed quickly in this area and implement locally, which directly benefited my institution in these ways. So these were some of the things that we had in the backdrop. We ended up compiling a long list of all kinds of ideas. A few of these were surfaced in the last 30 minutes of discussion and organized based on a recommendation from Sarah from the BNF around organization, outreach and advocacy, communication, some specific project ideas that we also thought we should consider. None of these are in any sort of prioritized order, so please don't interpret the way that they're listed as being a priority order. But I'm going to quickly walk through some of the specific things that were brought up sort of in discussions. Around organization, we talked about there's a specific effort that is happening already about putting both Heritrix and Wayback open source projects onto GitHub in new relaunches of those projects that would allow the IPC community to do what we will with them. So it's an open field in terms of how we want to take that opportunity and run with it or not. We talked about rethinking the working group structure. In general, everyone liked the idea of, I think Gildas framed it as an interest group, having these umbrellas that allow people to come into the organization and find a home, a starting point to sort of branch into specific projects or work. Whether those are access, harvest, and preservation is unclear, although in general everyone felt that the preservation working group is a really robust community and we didn't want to mess with that in and of itself. But everyone agreed that having some focus or task-based or project-oriented groups that had specific goals, objectives, and deliverables associated with those in a finite time frame would be valuable to the organization. We could organize for periods of time and execute specific tasks to the benefit of the broader group. We definitely want to continually, though, to map those back to local priorities as best we can. Maybe those are regional priorities versus individual institutional priorities, because that might be hard to meet across such a broad membership. But it would be important to constantly reality check that what we're engaging our time and resource in is benefiting the broadest base of membership possible. We also talked about sort of the reality that we're facing in terms of not being able to travel extensively, and what can we do to try to mitigate some of those issues. And regional meetings was brought up quite a bit. Also trying to think creatively about how we could involve the IAPC in more of the research projects that are happening in different corners of the globe. We know that there are some issues around the IPC not being a traditional legal entity, but we'd like to see if there's ways of mitigating that and still involving the IPC more formally in some of these efforts. On the outreach side, just staying down, we talked about making sure that we do revise the mission to reflect all memory institutions, so it doesn't just list national libraries. We did also talk specifically about doing outreach to underrepresented corners of the globe, maybe having regional events where we bring aspects of web archiving, even almost like a web archiving toolkit, where you could have some simple piece of infrastructure that allowed local institutions to get a feel for what it would be like to start web archiving, be sort of a hosted service somewhere as well, that maybe was sponsored by the IAPC. We talked about sending more outreach to universities and engaging research groups and universities within our membership, expanding that. But ensuring that in that process we have a very clear mission and set of goals in whatever outreach we engage in, so that we're very clear about what it is we're trying to accomplish and how that would be incorporated into our current work. On the communication and documentation side, there's broad agreement that we really need a better way to share information. I think some of the other groups described it as kind of a repository where we put documentation around best practice, maybe better or improved documentation about specific tools or implementations, and that we need a way to facilitate that. Also, just coming up with some sort of decision around what communication technology we're going to use. I know that all institutions have some limitations, so we thought maybe just doing a quick survey of all of our members and figuring out, can everyone use a Google Hangout? If so, can we start to standardize on that and all have presences where we can have these ad hoc meetings using that type of technology? IRC came up, certainly Skype comes up, although many of our members can't use Skype. So we need to start peeling back and figuring out what we can use and making it a lot easier to connect with each other beyond email. In terms of the specific topics of interest, there were a number of ideas, but certainly some around this concept of doing more in the area of standards. Starting to describe web archiving in the context of even something like OAIS, trying to figure out maybe what might be a recommended framework for describing what does quality mean, what is the standard for quality in web archives. Do we have one that we can put out there and frame in specific contexts? To the extent that we can start to make some of these things a little bit more transparent, a little bit more available to a broader body of institutions, is that another way we can sort of promote out into a broader community. The archiving of social media certainly came up a lot in terms of trying to figure out if we can form a task force that might just initially be information share amongst institutions. A lot of us have come up with techniques and approaches, workflows that have enabled both capture and replay, or one or the other, or some combination thereof. But that information, again, it's hard to distribute, it's hard to disseminate, it's hard to provide visibility into those implementations. So that was one area of emphasis that came up in discussions. Another one was sort of the growing need. We have international characters and domain names that are much more prevalent in lots of corners of the globe. And how are we addressing that from an access perspective? Primarily amongst access tools, but I'm sure it has a ripple effect through the whole life cycle of web archiving. So that was another area that might warrant putting sort of a working group around. The Library of Congress is interested to find out how many members might want to work on putting a plugin in place to WordPress. It's one of the leading publishers of blogs globally. In fact, 45% of their content is in fact international in nature, so not specific to .com at all. So that's another project idea that has surfaced. And finally, we did have a little bit of discussion around how can we incubate innovation within this community, and what are maybe some of the things that we could start to try to facilitate that and to create a mechanism for not only sharing expertise and knowledge, but actually getting in there and experimenting collaboratively. So one idea is to see, is there some form of sandbox, for lack of a better way of describing it, that we can support as a community that would allow our members to be able to come together and assemble tools and workflows in different ways, experiment with new implementations, and actually provide that shared visibility in ways that's sometimes hard across institutional boundaries. So those were some of the key themes. Did I miss anything for those of us that were in my group?
I think our next step is that we send that document once we merge it out to the full membership, so people who were not able to attend can provide feedback over the next 2 or 3 weeks as well. Would all the steering committee members who are here in the room raise your hand? So if people have any follow-up, contact one of these folks and they will be able to bring your message to the steering committee as well. I think we're going right now to break, so we want to give you time for a break and then